Hello students of NG Prime. So today we have a new video class. And today we shall talk about gerund and participle, mainly about participle. We know that gerund and participle can indicate aspects of the verbs. So gerund indicates something in progress, while participle indicates something perfect. It means something finished, something complete. But the form of ing, or the form of gerund, is very simple. We always add the letters I and G. So, if I speak, for instance, to speak, gerund is speaking. Of course, we have some exceptions, but they are very easy. For instance, sometimes we have verbs that can have double consonants. It's the case of the verb to cut. So we have cutting and many other exceptions. But again, they are easy. Another exception is the verb to lie. That the verb in gerund is lying. This happens because of the sound and the rules of pronunciation. But again, this is something that we don't need to really understand in the minimum details. If you learn how to put ing, it's simple in a general way. But participle, by the other hand, is not quite simple. Participle of the verb to close is closed. Similar to the past, but remember, participle and past are different. So, very often, very frequently, participle and past tenses, they have a similar form. But they are not the same. They are not equal. In the case of the verb to close, it is very similar. But with the verb to go, participle is gone. Very different, and not went, for instance. So, how can I learn participles? In a general way, we need to study them. And we need to know them one by one. But, fortunately, here we are today. And with some simple tips, you will be able to remind yourself and to remember the most common examples of participle. Remember, they can be used to form composite tenses, but not only this. Sometimes participles can be used as, for instance, adjectives. And we shall take a look at these options as well. So let's go. What did we do? So far, until here in the course, we had 150 verbs. we had 150 verbs. So, today you will learn the division of the most common participles. Let's go! So we have 150 verbs. How can I discover the participle of these verbs? Well, I have a very good news. First, if the verb is regular, that's our first option. That's our first hypothesis. If the verb is regular, participle will probably be regular. So let's take some examples. So, here we have it. Past of the verb to close, closed. And participle, closed. Oh, it's very similar in the form, right? To open, past, opened. And participle, opened. To talk, talked, talked. So, when we have a regular verb, the tendency is to have a regular participle as well. So, regular past, regular participle. Is this always true? No, but it is very common. The exceptions for this idea are very rare. But let's go. As the verb to show. To show has showed as past tense, but participle we have two options, showed or shown. So it is possible to find an irregular participle for a regular past, as it is the case for the verb to show. But again, this is an exception. So, the good news is that most verbs that we have seen so far are regular. So, big part of these verbs, we already know the participle. We don't need to think about a different participle or simply a different word. But how much of the verbs are regular? Easy. We counted every verb in the first and second stages, and we found that 52 and we found that basically 52% of the verbs are regular. So, if you think, oh, participle is very difficult. No, it's not so difficult. Just remember, 50% of the verbs are already regular. So you will not have a problem with participles when they are regular. But and when they are irregular? Let's check it out. When the verbs are irregulars, there are some possibilities. And the first possibility is the verb to remain equal the past. So, how can we call this? We can call it as similars, which means the verb is irregular, but participle is still similar to the past. So let's go to some examples. So here we have some examples. To leave, past tense, left, and participle, left. To tell, past tense, told, and participle, told. To beat, past, beat, participle, beat or beaten. In this case, we have two options. So it's very common for the verbs in English to have two participles. But it's also common for sometimes we see this and oh my god, it's so difficult. No, it is very common to have two participles in Portuguese as well. Sometimes we have one regular and another irregular participle, including in Portuguese. Okay, some examples of this in Portuguese are incluído or incluso. Both are participles and there is no problem. One is regular and another is irregular, and they are both correct. They are just different. So the same thing happens here in English. Beat, beaten. But here, pay attention. They are all irregulars. They have irregular pasts, but they also have irregular particles, but they are similar. So it's also easy. We know that 52% of the verbs are regular, so that's not a problem. When we have irregulars, we have the similars, the similar verbs. They present past and participle in the same way of writing and speaking. So this is another easy thing for us. This is another good news. So what is the representation of these similars when we speak about verbs? The proportion of these verbs are 26 comma dot. Or better, let's round it up to 27%. Okay, so just to be an entire number. So 27% of verbs, they are irregular, but they also have the same participle. So if we put this together, we know that we have 79% of the verbs that are basically easy to understand the participle. So after this, you may ask, what is next? Let's figure it out. Another possibility that is very common is for us to add N, the letter N, to the end of the word, to the end of the verb. So, if the verb is irregular and participle is not similar to the past, we may try to find an N there. Let's have some examples. So, here we have some examples. To be, what is past tense? Was, were. But participle is being. Of course, in this case, we put an additional E because of the sound. Because imagine, if I say this, it would be Ben. The name doesn't seem right, okay? So, basically, we need to figure it out by the sound. We need to add the sound of N, not necessarily just the letter N when we are writing. So, when I speak B and I put the sound of N, we have been. The same thing happens with the verb to take. Past tense, took. And participle, taken. To eat, past, ate. Participle, eaten. To speak, past, spoke. Participle, spoken. So, you can see that the verb to speak is a little different from the verb to eat, to take, and to be. Why? Because these verbs will take the natural form, the original form, the base form, and you put N. But it can also happen that the verb takes, for instance, the past tense form, and we put N. Another example is to forget, past tense, forgot, participle, forgotten. So you put N in the past tense, not in the present tense, if we can say like that. So this is not an idea that it's not always so clear as a rule. This is just an idea for us to remember the verbs more easily. So if you're finding yourself in troubles in time of recalling any verb in participle, remember, if it doesn't sound correct as a regular verb, it's not correct. If it doesn't seem correct like a similar verb using the past tense, doesn't seem right. For instance, I have took, doesn't seem right. So what can you try? You try adding N to the structure. Maybe you have been, taken, eaten, spoken. This is a very common form. This is not just one form because it can be present or past, but in general, if you have the idea of N, you remember that many participles have N in their structure. So again, what is the percentage of these verbs that carry this N in their genes? Let's call it like that, in their form. It is almost 12%. It's a considerable quantity of verbs that have this structure. So if we take this in the universe of 150 verbs, it means that we have more or less 18 verbs with this structure, finishing with N. Okay, so it's a very common structure. Okay, don't forget, if you want to try a form, remember it's always possible to put N. Okay, so we can try to find the participle. But if we put all these maths together, right, we have 52% plus 27% plus 12%. It's not 100% yet, correct? Of course not. So here we have 79 plus 89, 91%. All this represents only 91%. So the question is, where is the other 9%? Okay, that's a good question. And we will see it right now. So, others. What means others? It means other forms. Let's go. So 6% of participles have different forms. So what is our biggest problem here? And this is not a good news. It's this. It's the others. Because here we have no way of helping. We really need to study them and to memorize them. Some examples are, for instance, the verb to come, which past tense is came, but participle is also come. It means it is similar to the present and not similar to the past. I repeat, it's similar to the present and not similar to the past. Another verb is the verb to begin. We have began in the past and begun at participle. And this is not inside the N termination. Why? Because began is not the base structure of present or past. It's completely different. So, began is not N termination. It's just different. Okay? To run has the same idea of the verb to come. So I run, to run is infinitive, past tense ran, and participle run. Again, it is similar to the present and not to the past. What is the secret to remember this? Again, this case only study. But if we see the general picture, we see that it's not so difficult. Only 6% are really, really different, correct? While the rest is very similar yet. But you might be asking, where are the other 3%? It's very easy, and it's also a good news. So where is the other 3%? More or less 3% of verbs do not have participle. And why is that? It is because they are very different. As you can see, we have a list of modal verbs mainly, right? They don't have participles. So, when we speak about the most important verbs in the universe of 150 verbs, we find more or less 3% of the verbs that do not have participle because they are modal verbs. So can as could and no participle. May, past, might, but it's some people consider might a different verb, but this is not the subject of second stage. And no participle. Must doesn't have past and doesn't have participle as well. So these verbs, the modal verbs, they are the verbs that don't have participle. They're that we have them like 3% of the verbs. So let's take the ideas again. We were talking first about gerund, that the form is very, very easy. We just put ing. But participle, the form is a little more complicated, right? We must study participle with more attention, correct? So, we started saying that basically 52% of the most common verbs, or 52% of the verbs we have seen until now, they are regular. So no problem, participle will probably be regular. And in the irregular verbs, we have in the total 27% of all the verbs are irregular verbs but with similar past tenses or past with participles, right? So our biggest problem is the rest, more or less 18%. They are really different. But 12% we can find a way by putting M. And only 6% represent a very difficult participle or a very different participle. And 3% of verbs simply don't have participle. So that's the idea. This idea is not to represent all the verbs, in English? Of course not. But just to have a base of the basic verbs that we already know. So, focus and study very much on these different and irregular verbs, because participle is very important as well. Okay? So, don't forget, we have regular verbs, irregular verbs, but irregulars that can be similar or different from the past tense. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Don't forget to do your lesson and see you in the next video. Thank you.